Our next speaker is from the United Kingdom. Dr. Gillian Tully became the UK Forensic Science Regulator in November 2014. In this role, she is responsible for setting standards in the UK for forensic science. Jill has worked in forensic science for over 25 years, specializing in DNA, innovation, validation, and enhancement of quality standards. She has provided expert testimony to courts in the UK and overseas, and has worked collaboratively with forensic practitioners around the world. On a personal note, I first became acquainted with Jill through some of her DNA publications more than 20 years ago. When I finally had the opportunity to visit her laboratory in 2009, she was then the Director of Research and Development for the UK Forensic Science Service, which at the time was arguably the most advanced forensic organization in the world, working on digital forensics, informatics, and advanced DNA methods. Jill brings a wealth of experience to her role of forensic science regulator in the UK, and we look forward to learning what she has to share with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gillian Tully.
I think I'm a bit shorter than everybody else who's presenting today. Is that okay? Can you hear me at the back? Good. Okay, thank you very much for your warm welcome, John, and for the invitation to speak here today. And I'm going to talk about the role of quality standards in moving forensic science forward. And I realise that that doesn't sound very exciting, but I will try to make quality standards interesting this morning. So the brief I was given for my presentation today was to talk about the impact of recent initiatives on the state of forensic science in my jurisdiction. And being as I'm a regulator and require everybody else to do what they're told, I thought I would do what I was told, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about this morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the things we've been doing around quality standards in the UK. I won't talk about very many of them because there's only limited time. And I'm going to then talk about the impact of them. And as you can see, you know, the initial impact of putting in place quality standards is often to generate absolute horror amongst those who have to implement them. But you know, that does move forward, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk about what needs to be done next and the mountains there are still to climb. So just to give a little bit of background on how forensic science is organised in the UK. In England and Wales, it's carried out largely in the commercial sector, but also quite a bit within policing, and there are 43 police forces in England and Wales. There's also forensic science carried out in relation to defence and security. Pathology is carried out separately, and there's also some medical services from the National Health Service. In Scotland, there's one single laboratory, the Scottish Police Authority Laboratory. It is separately run and managed from the police, but it is one state-run laboratory, but with separate pathology and medical forensics as well. And in Northern Ireland, there's a similar construct to Scotland, where there's forensic science in Northern Ireland, there's a government laboratory, a state pathology department, and again, medical services. And my role as forensic science regulator is to ensure that provision of forensic science services across the criminal justice systems in the UK is subject to an appropriate regime of quality standards. So that's what I'm there to do. So I've set out what my aims are in trying to achieve everything being of the right quality in forensic science in the UK. So firstly, I want to have quality standards in place for all disciplines that are equally applied in all sectors, because you can see from that last slide that we have all sorts of people doing forensic science, from commercial sector, policing, and in the medical arena, and so on. I want full compliance with those quality standards and a mature quality culture, because actually just getting a badge for a quality standard is by no means enough. There has to be that mature quality culture that can look back and see what's gone wrong and learn from it, that can look forward in terms of how it's going to continuously improve, and that is actually getting some benefits out of having quality systems in place, that's getting efficiency, effectiveness, and the right evidence. And then the final thing that we really need to get, and this crosses over quite a lot with what's just been said about the Netherlands, is a shared understanding across all stakeholders in forensic science about what forensic science means, but particularly about quality standards and what they mean and what it means if a laboratory is accredited or if it's not accredited. And so that the aims of the whole criminal justice system are supported, rather than just the aims of the initial investigator or just the aims of the court, but the whole criminal justice system is supported. So that there's a clear expectation for expert witnesses and clear expectations from the courts, and so that forensic science is supported by research and development as well. So those are the main top-level aims that I'm trying to achieve. I don't normally put pictures of myself up. I just thought I would show you where to get all the documents that I will refer to at any point, and all the documents that we produce, we publish on gov.uk, which is a government website. So if you go to gov.uk and search for Forensic Science Regulator, this is the page you'll see, and all the documents that I'll refer to and many more are all available freely on that website. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one or two of the what are we doing. So I'm going to talk about the codes first of all. And the Codes of Practice and Conduct, the Regulator's Codes of Practice and Conduct, first came out in 2011, were published by my predecessor. We're just on issue 3 now, which was published this month. And that sets out a very clear statement of requirements for any forensic science provider, whether they be a laboratory, a police organisation, or whoever they may be, what they need to do in terms of accreditation requirements and by when. The other thing the codes do is they aim to really explain the standards, and the standards primarily around ISO 17025 with a bit of ISO 17020. But explain what they mean for forensic science in the UK. So they're very generic standards, and we need to set out for practitioners what they mean. It's very much weighted towards areas where there have been issues in the UK. So there's a big section on validation, because there was comment in court at one point about the fact that there needed to be a standard for validation so that everybody knew what they needed to do to validate. And there's also a requirement on all organisations to report when things go wrong. So to pick up the phone to me and say, something's gone wrong, we've had an error. Because the only way we're going to improve is if we can actually look at what has gone wrong and put in place the sort of root cause analysis that was spoken about before, but in a very non-judgmental way, in a way that we learn and we move forward. So what I've said in part of the foreword to this version of the codes is that my aim is that all forensic science is of the required level of quality, and I've set out the quality standards in the codes. I think an important thing to say is that accreditation is not an end in itself. It's just the mechanism by which we monitor compliance with the quality standards. And although I have set dates by which people must become accredited, there's no excuse for delay in implementing the quality standards. So what impact have the codes had in the UK? So I'd say, first of all, if we think about forensic science, forensic service providers, who've been in this job for a long time, largely commercial now in the UK, they all have very broad scopes of ISO 17025 accreditation. They have a very good quality culture. There's a lot of self-reporting. They'll be the first to pick up the phone and tell me when something's gone wrong, and they produce really thorough error investigations and quality improvements from anything that does go wrong. A lot more work has gone into the police service since the closure of the Forensic Science Service, and some of that work sits within sort of forensic services departments in policing, and those forensic services departments typically do things like recover DNA and recover enhanced fingerprints. So all that work is accredited now within policing, and the culture is developing. A little bit slower to pick up the phone and say something's gone wrong, but it's developing and it's getting there. Fingerprint comparison, there's a date of 2018 set for compliance to 17025 accreditation there, and there's good progress being made in that area. Digital forensics, I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. Rather painful progress in that area, but progress nonetheless. And then another area that tends to sit outside forensic services, tends to sit just in the investigative side of policing, is firearms classification, chronographs. Who really knows if the police forces all have accounted properly for uncertainty of measurement in their chronographs? So some urgent work to do there. Forensic pathology, we've got a good quality culture there. They've got their own code. We do annual audits. But forensic medical examination, the actual recovery of evidence from rape victims and sexual assault victims, from suspects in custody suites and so on, there's more work to do there. Custody suites are not really well designed or cleaned for collection of evidence from suspects, but it does happen in those areas. So that's an area where we really still need to do some work. Future impact, I think when we have everybody fully compliant with everything that's in the codes of practice and conduct, then the potential for a quality failure won't have gone away, but the potential for the quality failure to cause a miscarriage of justice will be substantially reduced, because everyone will understand what's going on, what the standards mean, what they don't mean, and there will be active reporting. So I'm continuing to put quite a lot of pressure on organisations to achieve accreditation despite the very challenging financial climate they find themselves in. Talk a little bit about digital forensics, because it's an area that is expanding rapidly. I'd say it's the most rapidly expanding area of forensic science that we have. So we have stated that organisations who do digital forensics must all be accredited to ISO 17025 by October 2017 for the areas that I've listed on this slide. So for imaging of hard drives and removable media, screening and recovery of data, and extraction and analysis of data. 2018 we've set for network capture and analysis, so when we're looking at actually going out to scenes and bringing down data off live networks. And as yet I haven't set a time for capture and analysis of social media and open source data, because we're still looking at how that can be accredited. An interesting one where we have had problems in 1 or 2 court cases is cell site analysis. Where was someone when they made a phone call? And what we're doing in this area is we've currently got a pilot to see how we can accredit this activity. And next week I have a meeting with all those who've expressed an interest in being part of this pilot. We've got 14 expressions of interest at the minute from across policing and the private sector. Some of them just do the radio frequency surveys around the place. Some of them do the whole cell site analysis. So we're looking to see how can we get this activity really tied down, properly assessed and accredited, because we have still things like organisations going into court and talking about an individual having been in the vicinity of a certain cell. Well, they may have been in that vicinity, but what does vicinity mean? And were they in the vicinity of 5 other cells as well? And what are the limitations, and what's the uncertainty in the measurement? So these are the things that I think it's really important to start tying down in digital forensics. So what impact have we had so far? 95% of police forces in England and Wales have now validated their procedures for imaging hard drives, which is up from about 0 last year. So I think that's a good step forward. It's been a lot of pain getting there, and that's just the validation part of what they need to do to get their 17025 accreditation. Applications for accreditation are now coming in, understanding is increasing, but there's a huge amount to do before 2017 to get these organisations all accredited. So what they are doing, and this is a really positive aspect of having introduced the need for quality standards, is that police forces and other organisations are starting to really work together. They're starting to collaborate, and they're getting themselves into groups, and then there's a lead force who's starting to do validation in one area, a lead force working on a different area, and then they're sharing all that information to go forward for accreditation. But we've had a couple of big stadium days where we've had hundreds of digital forensics people together at various interesting places around the UK. But that date of October 2017 is hugely challenging, and I think it's fair to say that with the number of organisations needing to be accredited, when we start getting slippage, it will cause a huge amount of problems. So there's a lot to do there. I'm going to talk a little bit about crime scenes. It's another of the areas that we're looking at to improve. And we've set a longer time scale for this purely because there's more work to do. So by 2020, all crime scene work needs to be accredited to 17020, both general crime scenes and also specifically fire investigation and collision investigation as well. We've already put out some guidance on bloodstain pattern analysis, and some guidance on the control and avoidance of contamination in crime scene examination involving DNA evidence recovery. So they're out there already. And we're starting, it's very early days, starting to have some sort of impact. So for example, one thing that's very true is that once people realise what the standards are, they start to raise concerns and complaints. So I've had one complaint in, for example, regarding the investigation of death of a pedestrian, And because the police in that instance were aware of the coming need for 17020, they did a really good investigation into what happened. They found that the individual who'd been conducting the investigation needed retraining. They got that in place, and they're starting to make those improvements because they're doing lots of measurements there. And what about uncertainty of measurement in all those measurements they're making? Through our series of pathology audits, we found an issue arose that a number of cases, coroners' post-mortems were being sent to non-forensic pathologists, being treated as fairly standard routine post-mortems. But once those post-mortems were started, it suddenly became obvious that they should have been treated as forensic post-mortems from the outset. And when that happens, evidence is lost before it gets to that stage. So we've identified a need for retraining for initial responders, because sometimes the fact that a death is suspicious is not actually being picked up from the available evidence, particularly when it's an elderly person or someone who's had a very chaotic lifestyle. So again, there's that role of cognitive bias, that role of expectation of, well, this was someone who was very elderly, it's probably just a natural death, or this is someone who had been taking a lot of drugs. There is slower progress where more infrastructure investment is required, and one area where I've putting quite a lot of pressure on people to change is in the labelling of exhibits at crime scenes, to move away from just using the initials of the crime scene attender and start having proper unique identification of exhibits right from the moment they're seized at a crime scene. So what are we going to do next? Some observations, first of all. Before we can plan what to do next, let's observe what's happening. One of the things that's clear is that if we have blind compliance with quality standards without any sort of accompanying culture change, then actually it's worse than useless. What happens, and what happened once or twice when fingerprint enhancement went into the quality system in the first place, is that people stopped thinking. They started using their standard operating procedures as an excuse not to think and just to follow blindly. They stopped offering some services because they didn't have them on their scope of accreditation. And none of that is what you need to do to effectively implement quality systems. You need to be thinking every single time, you need to be moving your systems on, and there are ways to use infrequently used methods without always having to have everything on your scope. So that's an important one. And I think really in terms of that journey that people need to make culturally, it does start with horror. Almost always it starts with horror. And I remember having that same horrified reaction back in the probably early 1990s when we first started looking at accreditation, and thought, how can we possibly do this? It's not feasible. But you go through various stages and there's sort of grudging acceptance of, got to do it. Well, let's just get through the pain of doing it. Then we get a level of acceptance. And quite often at the end, you get people being quite enthusiastic about it. I get people standing up at conferences and saying, well, you know, I'm a real poacher turned gamekeeper because I used to think this was just all a waste of money. But now I really see the difference it makes, and all victims deserve that their evidence is handled properly. A few more observations. The total value of having everything under a quality system is much greater than the value of each individual little discipline having some quality standards. Once you start getting that quality system throughout the whole of the landscape, you find that the culture moves on much, much more quickly. And another observation, you have to keep the pressure up. So in November, I issued an annual report, and I praised what was going well. I was also quite critical of some areas where there wasn't enough change, and I think that we do need to keep the pressure up to change. So what are we going to do next? These are some timescales that have been around getting various disciplines within accreditation. Got some residual work to do on firearms. Got digital forensics, fingerprint comparison, and crime scenes coming in. Compliance and accreditation to the Forensic Science Regulators' Codes of Practice and Conduct becomes mandatory from October 2017. And all of it really is about just improving the culture of quality and really changing how we go about doing our forensic analysis. One other thing that we're doing at the minute is checking how it all fits together, checking that people aren't just doing a bit of quality here and a bit of quality there and a bit of quality over here. So I've taken rape cases as an example because they haven't got the resources dedicated to them that murders have, but they've often got quite complex, multiple different evidence types in there. So I'm looking at a review of a small number of rape cases, right from the crime scene through to what happened in court, looking at how the forensic strategy is put together, how the evidence is collected, how it's analysed, interpreted, how the case is built, and what the outcomes are. So in about 6 months, I hope to be able to be reporting on what that's showing. So just to finish up, those were my aims. What do I have to say about current status? Well, it's all very much work in progress, but we are making progress, slow progress, but we're making progress. And people are realising that when you put that validation and competence, I would say I pick those two things out as the really key parts of the accreditation. When the scientific methods have scientific validation behind them and competent people doing them, we really reduce the risk of errors and increase the quality of what we're doing. So thank you very much.